Let's get going. We've got 45 people in the room, so I think we're going to kick it off because this is going to be a 1 hour session. We're going to have a brief introduction, and then Mike will get into the presentation. And so we're going to go through all the housekeeping. So welcome to this webinar series. And we are going to be recording this presentation so you can review this at a later time. And I just want to thank you for taking your time out of your busy schedule to attend this presentation on scales. So my name is Jeff Pichet. I'm from New Jersey. I'm an arborologist, which means I'm a technical support specialist. I work along with Allison Harrell. She is from Portland, Oregon, and she is also out there as well doing technical support along with Patrick Anderson. He is also on the panel, and they're all in the background, and they will be fielding your questions and giving you the answers at the end of the presentation. So just a little bit of housekeeping. If you do have a question, please put it into the Q&A box instead of the chat box. I'll get lost in the chat box. And so, as I mentioned, this will be recorded and this will be available to you. And this is worth one ISA CEU. And if for some reason you didn't have your number, please type that into the Q&A box and it will be recorded. And if you live in Pennsylvania, you will be obtaining one pesticide applicator credit. And so I want to introduce Dr. Mike Raup. Mike is a professor emeritus at University of Maryland, and he is very widely published. He's a regular guest on television and radio, and he's the author of 2 websites, Bug of the Week, and he also has a Bug of the Week on YouTube as well that reaches thousands of viewers. And he is seen in more than 200 countries. And his recent book, 26 Things That Bug Me, introduces children to the wonders of insects. And so I think that's while managing insects and mites on woody ornamental and woody landscape plants, this is the publication that I've used, and I really suggest that you go purchase this booklet that he co-authored, and you want to get detailed information. This is the Bible. So without further ado, I would like to have Mike take over the screen, and thank you for doing your presentation today, Mike.
Well, thanks so much, Jeff, for that nice introduction. I wanted to thank all my buddies at Rainbow. It's great to be here. Always fun to tell you some bug stories this morning. And with that, let me bring up the share screen. But while I got the big picture here, I'm going to give you guys and gals a little pop quiz. So look behind me. I got some scales. I got some ants. I'm going to come back with you in just a minute, and somebody can tell me what the heck is going on there. Okay. I think this is the one we want. And Jeff, if you could give me a heads up that things are good.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, off we go. Now, these bugs that you saw behind me, anybody have a clue as to what kind of scales they are? You can unmute if you like and give me your guess. You get a door prize.
So Mike, they actually can't unmute. We have that turned off, so they would have to push it into chat or Q&A. Sorry, everybody. Sorry, everybody.
Okay, that's okay. Very good. Well, you know what? Thank you, Patrick, and we can pick that up later then. Maybe we'll do this at the end. You might see these rascals one more time before we're done. I also want to thank my colleague, Paula Shrewsbury, who helped provide slides and some of the content we're going to go over today. Okay. So let's advance. There we go. Whoops. All right. A little bit of taxonomy first, gang. I'm going to take you back to your old entomology courses. I hope they weren't too painful. Scale insects belong to a very large group of insects, which we call the hemiptera, the half-winged insect. We divide these into three major categories, what we call the true bugs. This would include things like bed bugs and stink bugs and assassin bugs. We have another bunch of these hemipterans we call the Echinorhyncha. These are basically bugs like leaf hoppers, tree hoppers, and for many folks this year, you're going to see the cicadas. Brood 10 is coming out very shortly. That's going to be a real hoot. Maybe we'll talk about that at the end if we have some time. And finally, the most problematic bunch of the hemiptera, in my opinion, some of the very worst performers in landscapes to give us the real headaches, are the ones we call the Sternorhyncha. This includes aphids, whiteflies, psyllids, adelgids, mealybugs, and the topic for today is going to be the scale insects. So that's where we're going to roll. Now, again, there are many, many different types of these Sternorhyncha. Upper left, let me see if I can get my cursor working. Here we go. We have things like mealybugs and whiteflies. We've got armored scales. We've got aphids. We've got soft scales. We're going to talk about basically the scale insects today, not so much the other group. The first group I want to start with are called the coccids. These are your soft scales. The example I showed you before is this one right here. This is tulip tree scale on magnolia. There's also, of course, magnolia scale. They look quite similar. They have very similar biologies, but the one I'm showing you here is tulip tree scale. Another group I'm going to talk about today are going to be the armored scales. Things like hemlock, elongate scale, San Jose, Japanese maple scale. We're going to skip the mealybugs. Here in the mid-Atlantic region, mealybugs really aren't a primary pest. We have to get down a little bit further across the Gulf, Florida, California. You folks joining us from those places know about mealybugs, but we're not going to do them today here for the mid-Atlantic. I will mention another very strange group of insects called the pit scales, the asterolocanids. Pretty creepy and a little bit different than some of the other ones. We'll touch briefly on some of our felt scales, the areococcid scales or areococcins. Some of the common ones include azalea bark scale and European elm scale, but hey, we've got a new performer on the block, that one that gets on crepe myrtle. We'll talk about that briefly. Gall-like scales, the kermesids, these are really a minor pest, not as big as the armored and soft scales, but I will give a mention to our gall-like scales before we finish up today. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about their basic life history. Basically, they're really quite different. The males and the females diverge basically morphologically and physiologically. With the males, they molt. We have several different stages. As you know, with insects, especially ones with what we call incomplete metamorphosis, the female lays eggs, the eggs hatch into nymphs, the nymphs molt several times before we have the adult insect. With the males, we have 5 of these different molting stages, or what we call instars, okay? The males are winged. They look like little gnats when they fly around, and they're active. The females, on the other hand, only have 3 stages, which is rather quite unusual. We call this type of development paedogenesis. It means what they've done is they look very much like juveniles. So if you ever look at an adult female scale, it looks like a nymph. It's for the most part very undeveloped, relatively speaking, to the male. In other words, the females are not going to have wings. They're just going to be a very large sack of eggs, basically, sucking on the plant. For many parts of their life cycle, they're not going to be mobile. All right, so they're not going to be moving around on that tree. Some stages will migrate back and forth between leaves and woody tissues, but relative to the males, they're sessile or immobile. Okay, let's start then with some of the characters, some of the other clues we can use to find these. For those of you who have been following my diagnostic series in tree care industry, We've talked about some of the signs and symptoms that insects leave behind. One of the ones that's always associated with these scale insects is wax. So there are certain species like the Florida and Indian wax scales that will produce these gumdrop-shaped wax features. There are others like the cottony camellia scale and cottony maple scale, where they'll produce wax to basically enclose the ovisacs. You can see the ovisacs tailing out here in the upper right. And then we have some like our armored scales, which are a little bit harder to define, but you can see on the bark of the tree that your armored scales will also produce these waxy covers on the bark of the tree. The scale insect itself is underneath those waxy covers. Okay, let's now talk about, we're going to jump in and talk a little bit about these soft scales, some of the life history about them. Basically, these are phloem feeders. Now, this is very important because the phloem tissue, as you know, is very rich in carbohydrates and nutrients. These insects, as they feed, have to process a lot of that fluid, and they're going to basically excrete the excess in the form of honeydew. Okay, so our soft scales, the coccids, are going to produce honeydew, whereas the others, the diaspidid scales, our armored scales, they are going to be cell bursters. They could be feeding on basically cambium tissue. They could be bursting cells in a leaf parenchyma tissue. And again, they're not going to produce honeydew. So that's an easy way to tell the difference right off out of the box between our soft scales, honeydew producers, and our armored scales, which don't produce honeydew. One of the symptoms we'll see behind, for example, with euonymus scale, is it feeds on a euonymus leaf. It's going to puncture cells and leave this kind of yellow discoloration behind. So that's a pretty good clue that we're dealing with an armored scale rather than a soft scale. Okay. Again, these tend to be larger than the armored scales. They have what has been described as kind of a bloated body shape. All right, you can see here the ants in the upper left panel feeding on the honeydew that's being excreted by these tulip tree scales. You can see the cottony type wax here on the cottony camellia scale, in this case on holly, and that kind of gumdrop shaped wax on our Florida wax scales and Indian wax scales on things like holly. Now, when we flip those things over, what we're really looking at on these scale insects here is the body of the insect itself. You can see the eggs here underneath when we flip that over, and the wax is covering the body of the insect. In other words, that wax is just attached to the body of the insect. And some of our armored scales will be somewhat different. All right, we'll talk about that in just a minute. Now, where do they feed? Well, that's a great question. I've got the soft scale circled here on the left. As you can see, the soft scale is going to put its mouth parts down through the bark. It's going to puncture, go through the phloem, and it's going to be feeding on the elements in here, in phloem, but also perhaps in cambium tissue. The armored scales, for sure, it's going to be, it's going to be feeding in the phloem tissue on the phloem sap. With our armored scales, those beaks are going to go a little bit deeper down, and they're probably going to be puncturing cells here in the cambium when they're feeding on the woody tissues. Okay, so soft scales, phloem feeders, armored scales are going to be cell bursters. Again, with the soft scale, sometimes we'll see them on the leaf surface. They can be usually on the underside of the leaf surface. Sometimes, like Ochlocanium scales, you will also find on upper leaf surfaces. So some feed on the top and some feed on the bottom. And as I said before, one of the characteristics, and this again is particularly disturbing or pretty nasty, frankly, is all that honeydew, because it's so carbohydrate rich, forms the substrate for a non-pathogenic fungus called sooty mold. Now, this probably interferes with photosynthesis. There's no question about that, but it doesn't directly harm that plant. Okay, it does not directly harm that plant. It does disfigure this plant, and you're going to want to wash that stuff off of there. Okay, this is going to be nasty for your clients. They're not going to want to see it. Again, we can see here with the oak lecanium in the upper left panel, we can see them plugged into the phloem tissue along the leaf vein. And as I said before, in the springtime, the crawlers, especially bark crawlers, are going to get pumped up. They're going to hump up. They're going to be producing large amounts of honeydew. And this is the time that you're going to see most of the honeydew accumulation associated when those females start to develop, let's say in April, May, and into June before they start laying eggs. Now, we can do what we call the flip test to find out if scales are alive or dead. In other words, what we do is we get a forceps or a dissecting pin, or you can use a knife or your finger, and we can simply flip these scale covers over and see what's going on inside. So here, on these lecanium scales, we flipped them over, and you can see the eggs and the crawlers hatching underneath. Here, we see one on oak. This is probably oak lecanium or perhaps European fruit lecanium. And when we flip it over, we simply see thousands of eggs underneath. And this is why scale populations can simply explode, because they can produce hundreds, if not thousands of eggs during the course of their lifetime. Okay. Again, a little bit more. There are various life cycle patterns. Different species will differ in terms of their periods of activity, the times at which they produce crawlers. And the crawler production is very important, because the crawlers are one of the cues we're going to use to time our applications, particularly if we're going after using an insect growth regulator to try to kill crawlers as a wet spray. They usually only have one generation here in the mid-Atlantic. Some really classic examples are oak lecanium, European fruit lecanium, calico scale, cottony maple scale. Okay, so a little diagram over here diagrams the various life stages. So they overwinter on the bark. As immatures, they will begin to hump up in the springtime. The adults will then be producing copious amounts of honeydew. They're going to begin to lay eggs. The eggs are going to hatch into little crawlers. They're going to go out and colonize the leaves and suck on the leaves all summer. Then as autumn approaches and the tree is about to drop its leaves, these guys aren't stupid. They're not going down to the ground. They're going to march back to the bark of the tree and overwinter. So that's a pretty classic life cycle for one of our soft scales like oak lecanium. Okay. And there's the relative timing on this. Okay. Again, I've spent a lot of time on this one, oak lecanium, because it's one of the real messy problems we have here in Mid-Atlantic. There's been an ongoing infestation along Massachusetts Avenue down in DC that's been very, very difficult to control. You know, people say, oh, you know, we should only plant native trees. Native trees are not that prone to pests and things like that. But hey, gang, guess what? Willow oaks, pin oaks, native trees, they get loaded with these scale insects. And part of the reason for this is down deep in the cities, when we go to highly urbanized areas with lots of concrete and impervious surface, you're simply not going to have the tiny parasitic wasps that help to control and reduce those populations in more natural areas. So these tend to be huge pests of the built environment, cities and places like that, more so than in the suburbs, where we have a more diverse community of natural enemies, parasitic wasps, ladybird beetles that help to control these things. So If you've got oak trees in impervious surface coming together along boulevards and roadways or corporate parks, don't be at all surprised, even if they're native plants, to have outbreaks of these scale insects. Of course, they'll also get on non-native oak trees as well. Here's what the crawlers look like, that immature stage. In the summertime, they're going to be out on the leaves, and this is a little bit odd, but they're going to be feeding on the upper surface of leaves for the Oaklecanium. They're translucent. They're going to be there all summer sucking sap, and then they're going to move back to that bark to overwinter. Okay, it's native, as I said. It specializes on oaks. There's one generation a year. As I've already mentioned, they're going to move out in April and May. The new crawlers, the females are going to plump up in the springtime very shortly as the trees break bud. The females are going to start sucking up that juice, making eggs. Crawlers are going to hatch, move the leaves, and then they're going to come back off the leaves in the autumn time. Now, in heavy infestations, we can get stunting, leaf yellowing, dieback. As I said before, sooty mold tends to be a very, very amazing problem. They can really build up. In addition to the sooty mold itself, the honeydew is going to attract stinging insects, things like yellow jackets and wasps. This creates a secondary problem. And as I said, most of the damage is going to happen in the springtime as those females begin to feed. Now, here's a slightly different one. This is cottony camellia scale, also known as taxus scale. It's a very close relative of cottony maple scale and cottony maple leaf scale. If you have to deal with these on those particular plants, maples in particulars. Again, these are the ovisacs. The females are going to be at the end of these ovisacs laying eggs. The eggs are going to be inside here. You can see that these eggs have already hatched, and we've got the little crawlers feeding. In this case, this scale insect is most common on the undersurface of leaves. I see these as a major pest of things like our cornuta varieties, some of the Chinese varieties that are very, very difficult to penetrate with your foliar sprays. It's really hard to get into those tight hollies. These populations can build up at very, very heavy levels. I also see them on taxus pretty commonly. Again, you've got a host here that's hard to penetrate with foliar sprays, and what you'd like to use perhaps is a translaminar or a systemic to move into that dense foliage. We'll talk more about materials in just a few minutes. Here's another one. When I first began my work several decades ago, I got to tell you the truth, it was pretty unusual to see wax scales this far north. But hey, guess what? The world's gotten a little bit warmer in 40 years, and now we regularly have wax scales overwintering here in Maryland. Again, you can go out right now and you can see the adult females. They're going to lay eggs in spring. The eggs are going to hatch, and they're going to form this very interesting stage called the cameo stage. I think you can obviously see why they call it a cameo. It looks just like a cameo. These things are going to be feeding throughout the summertime. Again, they will overwinter. You'll see these on the bark of the tree. And a little later this spring, they're going to complete their development. The females will start to lay eggs, and the little crawlers will then move out onto the stems and sometimes onto leaf veins. So big pest, particularly of ilex, but they'll also get on euonymus, boxwood, and pyracantha. Pretty important pest here now in the mid-Atlantic region. I've already talked about this one quite a bit. This is tulip tree scale. It's a close relative of magnolia scale. Now for this one, gang, the life cycle is going to be a little bit different. As I said, most of these other soft scales are going to be producing their eggs and their crawlers in the springtime, April, May, June, something like that. Hey, this one's a little bit different. This one starts pretty late in the year. Basically, they're going to be overwintering on the bark of the tree right now as little dark black crawlers. They are then going to molt. The adults are going to be present actually in late summer in August, and early autumn is when the females are going to pump up. You'll see them hump up, and they're actually going to lay their eggs in September and October, which is kind of the flip side of most of these other soft scales. And I think this is part of the reason people sometimes have problems controlling tulip tree scale and magnolia scale, which has a very similar life cycle. Your crawlers are going to be late summer, early autumn, not spring. So if you're targeting crawlers, that's where you want to be shooting. Okay. Again, let's talk a little bit about management now. Monitoring. What you want to do is look for signs and symptoms of damage to the tree. Again, it could be off-color foliage. It could be honeydew. I think honeydew is a really easy thing to spot. So whenever I see honeydew, I start looking around for soft scales or aphids. Look for the crawlers. It's important to time if you're going to go after crawlers with horticultural oils. If you've got a client that wants an organic approach, for example, you can try to tackle these with horticultural oils, that's for sure, or some of the other OMRI approved contact materials. Your immatures are going to be on leaves and twigs, adults in the spring. You'll also see beneficial insects on these plants. I'll talk about things like ladybugs and such in just a minute or two, and also look for ants. One of the quickest ways to find out is you have soft scale, or for that matter, a felt scale infestation, is to look for ant trails going up and down the bole of the tree. This is what I use to track magnolia scale and tulip tree scales on things like magnolia. I just follow those ants to where the scales are, just watch them for a couple minutes, they'll take you right to the scale. And sometimes if that infestation is really light, I'll just prune it out. You know, I'll look around on a couple branches. If I don't see more scale insects, hey, just prune out that branch, or you can simply crush those scale insects and boom, you're done. Okay. The other thing we know about scale insects is they really like high levels of nitrogen fertilizer. So unless there's really a reason to do this, unless your incremental growth is small, unless your leaves are small, unless your plant is yellow, first of all, get a soil test done and make sure it's not something else. But if you can cut back on your rates of nitrogen fertilization, your scale populations are going to go way down. So, you know, keep an eye on it and try to keep those populations down as much as possible. Some people say that high pressure spray washes will maybe help to dislodge some of these things. Just don't blast the bark off the tree if you're going to do that, gang. I really can't attest to this. Now, there are lots of good products on the market. Let's make sure we don't lose this slide. Again, sometimes it's important to get rid of the ants first because those ants are protecting your scale insects from beneficial insects. We find that in nature, basically, there are lots of species of predators that love to eat these things. Ladybird beetles, for example, are really, really important. For some of our wax scales, there are also these little tiny parasitic wasps that take a lot of them out. And there have been several biological control programs that have been useful. Now, let's talk a little bit about chemicals here. One of my favorite chemicals, when I've got a really nasty scale problem, and this will go almost all the way across the board, one of my favorite active ingredients is pyriproxyfen. This compound is in the Rainbow product Proxite. It's an excellent product. It's also found in Distance, of course. So these are compounds. If you can target those crawlers, find out when your crawlers are active. In my opinion, that active ingredient is probably the single best active ingredient to do as a contact or a wet spray to control those scale insects. There's another one on the market. It's called Talus, which is another kind of growth regulator that does a very nice job cleaning up scales. We often use this in our nursery industries here in Maryland. If you want to go contact, again, if you've got a client that says, hey, you know, I want an OMRI approved product, you can go after those crawlers with your summer rates of your horticultural spray oils. That's going to be a 1 or 2% rate. You might have to do a couple applications. Again, if you have one of these scales that's laying eggs over a long period of time. Several of the neonics are going to be highly effective as well. But here, remember, we're going to have potential problems if these are plants like your magnolias that are going to bloom, and you may have a complication with pollinators that might be visiting those plants for nectar and pollen. So be sure you look at your bee warning box. Again, for the neonics like imidacloprid, they can work very well, but hey, they're going to remain in your flowering plants for a couple of years. There may also be carryover effects with dinotephuran, so you want to be careful and maybe steer clear of that. There are other good systemic problems that are going to work well. Lepitect, good old acephate, really good at killing scales. It kills caterpillars, it kills lots of things. Rainbow's got some nice formulations of that. And again, we have one called Altus. This is a different mode of action. And, this one also is a pretty good scale material as well. But in my book, it's pyriproxyfen, the active ingredient, the talus, or hort oils for your clients that want maybe a little bit less aggressive approach. Okay. Now, one thing you will see with these soft scales, you'll see something like this. I've had an arborist come in and say, oh, what's that mealybug doing there? That's not a mealybug. That's the immature stage of this thing. This is skimnus. These ladybird beetles can be very potent allies in your war against soft scales and other kind of scale insects. So you might want to have a look. This thing is wedged underneath that female scale, and as that female's laying eggs, it's just sitting there with its mouth open, gobbling up those eggs coming out of that female. So have a look out for these. Try not to use materials. If you have a lot of these ladybugs and relatively few scales, be sure you check and see what's going on before you go ahead and treat those, okay? All right. Now let's talk a little bit about how some of the products do against some of our soft scales in this case. Florida wax scales, some nice work done down at Texas A&M by Scott. Basically, here's our untreated. The ones that gave us the very best here are the TriStar. TriStar is acetamiprid, I believe. So these are neonicotinoid insecticides. The different rates of the Safari, as you can see, your dinotephuran, were giving us different levels of control here. Some were at the highest rate, of course, was giving us pretty good levels of control. But in this particular study, the TriStar really gave us the very best levels of control. So neonics can work, but again, you want to be careful not to apply these until after those plants have bloomed. Here's a little bit of work that I did, again, with wax scale. And one of the neonics, dinotephuran, this was on pyracantha. And again, very good levels of control. These are post counts. I can't see my top bar here. It's obscured by a control bar. And but I will tell you that you can see that we got really good levels of control of scale insects using that particular material on pyracantha. But again, because pyracantha is going to be visited by pollinators, that's going to have to go on after bloom. Some nice work done by my colleague Stanton Gill. Again, tulip tree scale here. This is the pyriproxyfen, the Proxite product here, or distance. Distance and orthine, talus, nah, not so much. Again, on this one, it was the pyriproxyfen that gave us very good levels of control of tulip tree scale. Okay, we're going to jump over now and start our next group. These are called the Diospididae. These are the armored scales, which is our second very large group of scale insects. And I got to tell you the truth, in my way of thinking, it really is the armored scales that are the most difficult to control. I think a lot of times we can get on top of those soft scales, but armored scales can be pretty tough, especially the bark feeding armored scales. Now, these little rascals are really, really small. They're flat, and that cover is going to sit over the top of the insect. So you can actually pop that cover off and see the insect below. Now, remember with the soft scales, what you see is the insect itself. The covers are often distinctive, and we can use those to diagnose the different species of armored scales. Sometimes within the wax, that's a wax that we see, we call it a test. Sometimes within that wax, you can actually see the shed skin, or what we call the exuvia of the scale insects gets embedded in the wax. As I said before, the armored scales do not excrete honeydew. Big difference. They're going to be cell bursters. They're going to get down into the epidermal cells. Maybe they're going to be down in some place like cambium bursting cells, something like that. And they'll have here in the mid-Atlantic, we'll have some species with 1 generation. We'll have some species with 2 generations. We'll have some species with 3 generations. So this is why you really have to know what the generation, what species you're working with, and how many generations, and when those generations occur, if you're going to get good control with one of your materials that you're applying at crawler time. Okay, so this, it becomes really critical. Now, once those eggs hatch and the crawlers move, they're going to settle down and they're not going to move anymore. Remember, with our soft scales, they're going to go out to the leaves to feed in the summertime, then they're coming back to the bark. Hey, these guys don't do that. Once those crawlers hatch and emerge and they plug into the vascular tissue of the plant, or to plug into the plant tissue with their mouth parts, they're going to sit there and feed for the rest of their life. Again, a little bit of comparison. These don't have a shell. You're looking at the body, the armored scale, it's covered with wax. These are usually pretty big. These are usually pretty small. These guys make honey. These guys don't make honeydew. These guys, the females can produce up to 1,000. These little rascals, maybe 100 if they're lucky. These ones, the nymphs and the females can move about. These ones, after they are crawlers, they hunker down and that's it. Okay, here's what some of these hard waxy covers look like. This is San Jose scale. This is elongate hemlock scale. This is oyster shell scale. Here you can see the wax I talked about, and right here is the exuvia, the shed skin of that scale insect before it molted and produced the next batch of wax. So that's that business that we can actually see sometimes, the shed skin. These are some of the symptoms you're going to see. This is very characteristic for parking lots where we already have restricted root zones. We got compacted soils. We've got a lot of heat. Reflective heat. We've got no natural enemies, no parasites in here. Hey, scales are going to go nuts. This is obscure scale and pin oak. Here we have euonymus scale. Remember I told you about those little yellow halos. You're going to see scale insects are on the bottom side of the leaves, but they're busting cells inside here, creating those yellow halos. And for things like our Japanese maple scale or our oyster shell scale, sometimes they're going to be so thick on those trees, you're going to be looking and you say, that's not the bark of the tree. Those are scale insects. I've seen this on Japanese red maples, dissectums, where the bark is just silver with Japanese maple scale. Okay, so when we flip over the scale cover, we take off the cover. Here's the female. Look at that thing. Oh my God. I don't know. That's just creepy looking. Here are the eggs. She'll pump out maybe 100 eggs. Those eggs are going to then hatch into the crawlers that move out and find new places to feed. Now, these are heavily attacked by tiny parasitic wasps. So in nature, in natural settings, you're going to see scale covers with these little holes. That means the parasitic wasps have emerged and killed those scale insects. Here's what the crawlers look like. This is pine needle scale. Okay, here's the crawlers, and here's the crawlers, what they look like when they're settled. And then as they mature, they're going to make the wax, the white wax like that. Okay, so that's pine needle scale. Again, here, sometimes these scale covers are going to be round. Sometimes they're going to be elongate. So here we see San Jose scale, and this is going to also be similar for, let's say, the obscure scale. You're going to have these round covers, and you can see the shed skins here. This is going to be elongate hemlock scale, used to be called Theorenea hemlock scale on the underside of the needles of hemlock. They're going to be elongate, and you can actually see right through that cover and see the scale insect beneath. So these are kind of translucent. Okay, again, the life cycle. The females in the springtime, they're going to produce the eggs. The crawlers are going to move out. They're going to settle. The male covers for these scale insects are going to be elongate. Underneath, you're going to find the developing male insect, which is going to have wings. Underneath the female, this could be like San Jose scale, for example. You're going to have a round cover. It's going to have the second instar female. And this one, as I said before, only has 3 life stages: the crawler, the second instar, and then the adult. And then as she grows, she's going to produce more and more wax. Okay. Now, the tricky thing here, these are the guys that feed on leaves and needles, some of the most common ones here in the mid-Atlantic. Euonymus scale, elongate hemlock scale, juniper scale, minute cypress scale. You're going to find these both on junipers and cypress. They're very, very similar. You can't tell them apart by looking. We have to dissect them under a microscope to tell them apart. Maskell scale, you're going to see this on Cryptomeria in particular here. Surprisingly, on Cryptomeria, I don't really see too much Cryptomeria scale. I usually see Maskell scale, and then we have pine needle scale, and sometimes white prunicola scale will get out on the leaves of things like cherry trees. Now, the thing I want you to see, gang, is for some of these scales, we got 2 generations a year. For some, we have 1 generation a year. And for some, we've got 3 generations a year. And this is kind of going to complicate your control tactics, right? Because now you're going to have to time out those controls to when you see those generations. I've already covered this. I don't want to belabor this. I'm going to keep moving. So here's classic euonymus scale damage on one of the Euonymus japonicus cultivars. Okay. Again, it's going to prefer euonymus species. It will also get on Pachysandra. So don't be surprised if you see it on Pachysandra. It's euonymus scale. Okay. There is a cultivar that may be a little bit more resistant. It's called Kyachovica. If you can get that cultivar, maybe that will help a little bit. It's not totally resistant, but it's somewhat resistant. And some of our species of deciduous euonymus, things like Euonymus elata, the burning bush, it's not going to be as susceptible to euonymus scale as the other ones. Now, this one's going to have 2 generations a year. Again, the way we'd like to control this is, again, cut back on your high nitrogen fertilizers when you can. The crawlers for this one are going to be active in May and June, and then August and September. Okay, that's when you're going to be looking for your crawlers here. What a mess. This is what it looks like on the bark, and this is where the heavy damage comes. This is where you'll start to see dieback on your euonymus when you have all these males and females all over the bark of the tree killing it. Okay. Yellow spots, branch dieback. Now, one of the guys that really helps to put a beat down on this, and probably one of the reasons I'm actually seeing a lot less euonymus scale here in Maryland than I did like 20 years ago. The reason for this is we imported a ladybird beetle. It's a relative of what we call the twice-stabbed ladybird beetle, so named because of these 2 red dots on its back. This one in many places was really put a beat down on euonymus scale, and frankly, in a lot of areas, euonymus scale isn't so much of a problem. It was because we brought in this beneficial and released it, and it worked pretty good. I've already talked about this. Again, for your chemical controls, if you want to go after those crawlers, you can use your Proxite or Talus. Horticultural oils timed out well. Again, be careful with temperature and humidity. You don't want to be applying hort oils on days when we have very high humidity and very high temperatures. It's the high humidity that's probably more important because that allows the oil to sit on the leaves and get the phytotoxicity. Now if you're, again, going after them with your neonics, okay, but be sure you're applying it after the bloom date of euonymus, because euonymus will be visited by pollinators. And again, as an alternative to your neonics, you can go after those rascals with Lepitect, a nice systemic. Fiorania or elongate hemlock scale. This is another one with 2 generations a year. The generations overlap in the summertime, so you can have crawlers basically present throughout the spring and summer. And this complicates it. When we've got scale insects with long generation times, it's going to complicate this. They're normally attacked by parasitoids, ladybird beetles are part of the natural control here. This is going to be cryptomeria. And when you start to see this dieback and fainting and cryptomeria, a lot of people think this is some abiotic factor. This is very often Mascal scale. Mascal scale is a teeny tiny scale that feeds down in the awls here, right here on these needles, way down in the crotches. And you can see lots and lots of scales. So this is when you're going to have to pull out your hand lens or microscope for. Pine needle scale, again, we've talked about this already. A lot of times you'll see these parasite holes in them. Let's talk about some of the bark feeders. Obscure scale, gloomy scale. This is a new kid on the block. Japanese maple scale has become a real problem here in our landscapes. Winged euonymus scale, not so much. Again, euonymus scale and oyster shell scale. Now, oyster shell is weird because it can have either 1 or 2 generations depending on which race it is. And then we've got a tough one, white peach scale and white prunicola scale, which have 3 generations. This really means you're going to have to do your homework and keep an eye on those crawler generations. Okay, obscure scale, 1 generation a year. The thing that's weird about this one, again, you're going to see it mostly on a 3- and 4-year-old wood. It's going to have gray covers. There's going to be these great incrustations up here. The crawlers are going to be active in July on this one. So something like euonymus scale, which is a 2-generation pest, you're going to see your first crawlers back in May. For this one, you're going to have to wait to July if you're going after the crawler stage. Okay, again, this is what it's going to look like when you see these holes. It means that your parasites have been at work there. There's the exit holes for your parasites. Okay, again, usually you'll find it doing the most damage, the most active infestations on 1 to 4-year-old wood, green wood. Here's another close relative of obscure scale called the gloomy scale. This is a huge pest on maple trees. You'll see these incrustations along the bark of the maple tree. It's another one of these circular test scales. You're going to see things like this, dieback, and you're going to have these amazing infestations up and down the bark. Again, in nature, these are attacked by tiny parasitic wasps that help keep the population down. But hey, when you've got a lot of hardscape out there, you're probably not going to have these parasitic wasps quite as frequently. Now, one of the big problems we're having recently here, as I said, is with Japanese maple scale. Again, this is an exotic scale. It can become very heavy. It is a very small scale. Look for silvery and white scale covers on the bark of your tree. Again, very small size. The crawlers have a very long period of activity, all the way from June to September. This really complicates your control, okay? So again, here in Maryland, we're sure we have 2 generations. It's got a huge host list. That's the other problem here. You're going to see it all kinds of stuff out there. But if you've got a tree dying back, look carefully at the bark of that tree along the trunk. Again, typical, these are some trees dying on our campus with Japanese maple scale. The infestations can become huge like this. Now, in terms of the generations, as I said, it has 2 generations. They move around by wind. They can blow from tree to tree. You can trap them, again, by putting sticky bands on your tree and seeing when the crawlers are moving. Okay, we can also time it by what we call plant phenological indicators. In other words, when different trees are blooming, coincide with the emergence of those crawlers, or we can use degree day models for this. Okay, Here's what the females look like. They're loaded with purple eggs, which is pretty. When you tear open a scale, you see purple eggs. It's probably Japanese maple scale. Now, in terms of timing, when we see a smoke tree or Chinese lilac or Stewardian bloom, that's when the first generation of crawlers are out here in Maryland. The second generation is going to appear when you see Aurelia spinosa, devil's walking stick, in bloom. So that's how we can time out the applications for our treatments. If you want to look at it in degree days, okay, or in calendar days, basically, here's when your peak activity for crawlers is here in Maryland, usually right around 1,203 degree days, which could be the first week of June. Second generation, about 3,100 degree days, which often occurs in August. So this is our timing for Maryland. Going to skip through that. We just said that. Okay. And we just said this. Now, it's attacked by many different species of wasps. That's what controls it in nature. Here again in our landscapes, when you have heavy populations, what you're going to do is try to tackle this again with your good IGRs, insect growth regulators, buprofezin, that's the talus material, or your pyriproxyfen, that's going to be your distance or proxate. Dormant oils can work, but because those crawlers spread out over such a long period of time, it's going to be difficult to put them down. Probably you're going to have multiple applications with your horticultural oil sprays. Okay, you can also go after them with a dormant oil spray, sure, in the off season, 3 or 4% oil. Okay, all right, let's talk a little bit about some control tactics here. Oops. Again, this is one against pine needle scale, insecticidal soap, but multiple applications. But if you're using dinotefuran, you're going to be able to knock it out with a single application. Now, remember, pine trees are not insect pollinated. So on a pine tree with pine needle scale, I think that's okay, right? Because you don't have, if they're wind pollinated, you're not worried about your pollinators here. This is some nice work done by Dan Herms with pine needle scale, again with transect in this case, given very nice levels of control against pine needle scale. Gloomy scale, this is work done probably by Steve Frank and his group down in North Carolina. The transect given really nice levels of control of gloomy scale on red maple. And here's another trial, again, the pyriproxyfen. Oops. Back this up a little bit. The pyriproxyfen and dinotefuran giving us pretty good levels of control of gloomy scale. Here's some work on Japanese maple scale showing that the pyriproxyfen, the proxite, giving us good levels of control here. And this is some work I did many years ago on Japanese maple scale showing our neonicotinoids arena. That's clothianidin, merit, and safari, giving us variable levels of control. In this case, the low rate of safari really didn't help us out very much. Higher rates worked well. And again, these were bark and soil applications to control Japanese maple scale. Euonymus scale, again, here's Steve Frank's study with pyriproxyfen, giving us some very nice levels of control, another study out of Clemson. And also gloomy scale, again, on gloomy scale, let me back that out. Gloomy scale on red maple. Again, your proxite given nice levels of control. Okay. Now, elongate scale control. I've done some work with this down at the National Arboretum. Again, these are some of our results. We went in several different ways. We did some wet sprays. We did some injections using an ArborJet system. We used merit and imicide, which again is an imidacloprid injection. We also used an injection with an experimental technique, a different kind of an ArborJet injection. We used the pyriproxyfen, in this case distance. We use ACE caps. Those were our materials. What we found with this is horticultural oils applied at crawler time gave us really nice levels of control. Here's the control, by the way, the comparison is over here, the untreated. The pyriproxyfen, great levels of control. Imicide, going in with that injection system, not so much. Soil drenches of merit better. Acephate, again, nice levels of control. These were ACE caps, by the way. This was not a Lepitec. So I'm guessing Lepitec would give us very good. This experimental Arborjet, not so much. But again, here we are again with our Proxite, our pyriproxyfen doing a very nice job, and some of our neonics. And again, on hemlocks, you're not worrying about pollinators, right? If they're wind pollinated. Okay, I'm going to skip that for the sake of time. Pit scales, astrolocanids. The most common ones I see are the ones on holly. And we also see them on oak pit making scale. This is the kind of damage they do, golden oak scale. They make these little pits. Again, you're going to go after these guys the same way with crawlers. Here's a study I did basically with a whole bunch of different materials. Let me see, my control bar is this one right here. This product, unfortunately, was a tall star application, probably not the best timing on it. I'm sorry, this was a merit application, the second one. And let me get my cursor back here, right? Not good. But again, all these other attempts I made using all these other materials, synthetic pyrethroids in this case, or the neonicotinoids, gave me very good levels of control against crawlers. Not surprising. I want to jump over now to the felt scales. Okay, these produce wax, and that wax usually is kind of cottony. Sometimes it's smooth, but usually it's cottony or felt-like, hence the name felt scales, the areococcid scales. Now, these ones, because they're feeding on phloem, they're going to make honeydew just like your soft scales, right? And you're going to have the sooty mold. We're also going to have the attendant stinging insects, which is not so good. Usually these ones are going to have 2 generations a year. The old school ones we're familiar with here are azalea bark scale. This is going to be a 2 generation a year. It's going to overwinter its nymphs, and then it's going to rip through 2 generations during the summertime. The European elm scale is the other one you'll see, and I'm sure you're familiar with this. This is a 1 generation pest. And there's some thought that this one may actually have now become resistant to some of the neonicotinoid insecticides out in places like Colorado. I think Whitney Crenshaw believes and has found that these things now may be resistant to our neonics. So in this case, you might want to jump over and maybe use something like your Lepitec, which is, again, great systemic material. It's going to get taken up and nail these little rascals. Now, the one you probably have already heard about a little bit in one of the other seminars, I'm just going to go over this for a minute or two in case you missed one of those, is what we call the crepe myrtle felt scale. You can see what it looks like on the bark of the tree. It was first detected down in Texas in 2004. It's since moved around a lot. We now have it in Maryland. I'm going to add Maryland to this list right here. This is a pretty nasty one. The adults lay a lot of eggs in these white ovisacs. They're going to basically create tremendous amounts of honeydew. Further in the south, they're going to be multiple generations. So you're going to have a lot of honeydew, a lot of stinging insects, and they will suck the life out of the crepe myrtle. So this is a particularly kind of an egregious pest because it is so notable and it creates so much honeydew and sooty mold. Okay, it's going to reduce the flowering and fruiting of those trees. And you can see here, that's one lot of scale insects. And each one of these could have hundreds of eggs underneath it. So not good.
Hey, Mike.
Yo.
We are coming up on time. So
got it.
If we want,
I'm wrapping.
Cool. Perfect.
Thanks so much for cutting in. I'm done in a minute or two. Okay, so keep an eye out for your beneficial insect. Pete Schultz says that ladybird beetles will move in. You can scrub these things off in heavily infested areas of the tree with a scrub brush, maybe a little soapy water on it. Remove heavily infested trees. And again, your systemics are going to do a great job on this. You can also go after those things with those insect growth regulators, time for crawlers. Okay. The gall-like scales, these are relatively rare. I don't think you have to worry much about these, at least in this part of the world, down in Texas a little bit more, but just go after these either with your systemics or with your crawler sprays. Okay, 1 generation a year. Okay, so with that, I'm going to leave it at this slide. Get the identification right, learn your life cycles, learn when your crawlers are out there, time your crawler stages appropriately, have an eye out for natural enemies. Sometimes the good guys will come in and take them out. Lower your nitrogen fertilization if you can, and then follow up your intervention to make sure you got them in the first place. So with that, thanks so much for having me in today. Good luck with your scales. They can be a little bit dicey, but if you stay on top of them, keep an eye, follow some of these recommendations, you're going to put the beat down on them.
Awesome, Mike. Thanks for that very detailed presentation. And I'm going to share my screen.
Okay, I'm going to do the, you can take me off. There we go.
Okay.
Stop share.
Okay, that's good, good. Okay. Okay, so we have only a few minutes. We're going to basically, we're not going to repeat what we just heard from Mike, but I just want to get into some of the other housekeeping items. Okay, get that? Oops, sorry. Oops, sorry. We have this toolbox approach, as we mentioned. This is the brief summary of the life cycle. The soft scales are treated different than armored scales, as we all know. Please keep in mind that we have over 50 protocols available to you, depending on what your issues are. And so we also have this hard copy, or we can download this digitally off the website. That's available for your TM. So this is the more important. So in order to get state pesticide credits, you have to go to the chat box and click on the link that has been placed in there, and you fill out your form. We have some upcoming webinars. Obviously, spotted lanternfly is a very hot topic. EAB is getting a little bit old, but it still applies. Growing your PHC business is really a great one. And also, we have a live field demonstration webinar coming up as well. So at the end of this, you please take some time to fill out the survey. That's going to help give us some feedback so we can improve these webinars in the future. Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for attending. And Mike, awesome presentation. It was quite informative.
Well, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Jeff. Thanks for having me over, and good luck this season, gang.
So for those of you who have to log off, I recognize you're at time. For those of you who would like to stay for a couple of minutes, we do have a couple of questions coming through that I think are good if you have time, Mike.
Sure, you bet.
Cool. So we have an interesting one. What is the theory behind the purpose of a waxy shell of scale? Like, what is the evolutionary advantage? How did that come to be?
That's a great question. The wax, number one, it does two things. Remember, these are very tiny organisms, and the smaller you are, the more problem you have with regulating your moisture content, because there's a simple ratio between surface area and volume. So very large organisms have a relatively large surface area to the volume of their body. Moisture loss for us, although none of us like to have dry skin, is not really so much of a problem. But when you're extremely small, your surface area to volume ratio is very high. And for insects, this is a huge problem because they dry out quickly. So every insect, just like plant leaves, they are coated with wax. The outermost layer is wax. So number one, that's the evolution of wax in insects, is to help them with moisture retention. Number two is the wax of these insects is a protection. It's a protection not only from moisture loss, but probably also from predators and parasitoids that would like to attack them. Let's think about our armored scales for a minute here. They're living basically like a turtle underneath a shell. It's going to be challenging for some predators that might feed on them to actually get through that shell, chew through the shell, and find the meat underneath. For others, some of our soft scale insects that have the cottony, fluffy wax, predators might come over there and try to take a bite out of that thing and say, mouthful of wax, that's not so much fun, and simply go find an aphid, something plump and juicy. Same thing with parasitoids. We think that maybe parasitic wasps have difficulty getting through those outer covers or shells. So we think that the major function of the wax is number one, to reduce moisture loss. Number two, to be a form of protection against the things that would like to eat them.
Cool, thank you. All right, what is your book title one more time? We have a couple of requests for that.
Yeah, well, the kids' book is called 26 Things That Bug Me. And you can get 26 Things That Bug Me by going through the ISA website. The other book is called Managing Insects and Mites on Woody Landscape Plants. And you're going to get that one through Tree Care Industry. Thanks, Jeff. So again, this is a complete guide. It's got about, I think we do about 200 different pests in there, the life cycles, the control, how you monitor them. There's a section on plant health care, how you set up a PHC program or IPM program, pictures of beneficial insects, and a pretty complete listing of the insecticides. I talked a lot of insecticides today, but as many of those insecticides, active ingredients, as I could find, I tried to put in that book, and they're matched the different pests that they're labeled for. So it's a pretty good reference, I think, for our practicing arborists and landscapers. Tree Care Industry, ISA.
Cool. All right, and then we just have, I'm going to wrap up this one, and then Michael, I'll reply to you. Confirm what is behind you from the first question that you introed with.
Yeah, this is going to be a tulip tree scale on magnolia being tended by ants. Ants are the protectors of scale insects and aphids. So yep, tulip tree scale. Not
Cool.
magnolia. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, that was it. I just said cool. I thought you were done, but continue.
No, there's another one that gets on there. It's called magnolia scale, and they in the immature stages are quite similar, but by the time we get adults, your magnolia scale is going to have a little bit more white wax cover than your tulip tree scale will, and they're slightly different in form. But the biologies are the same. It doesn't matter if it's tulip tree or magnolia scale. You're gonna put the beat down on those two exactly the same way. You know, you're going to time your crawlers, or you can go after them with your systemics. Use your IGRs and put the beat down on that way. Or again, if you don't want to use neonex, a lot of my buddies are telling me they're getting great luck with Lepitect. Again, that's a nice systemic going in through the soil, and you know, the Lepitect is going to go up there and put the beat down on these guys. So we got good products here to get rid of these scales now.
Great, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And we will wrap that. There's a few questions that came through that we will answer you, but for the sake of time, thank you all so much for being here. And thank you, Mike. We really appreciate you.
My pleasure. Thanks again. Good luck, everybody. Stay safe.
Thank you again, Mike.
Okay, Jeff, thanks so much.
Thank you.